That didn't. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Over here.
Thank you for being with us on
Do you
this
see this, Bruce?
No,
Tuesday.
oh, yeah. Now I do. Yep.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so what we've got here is here's a picture of Jung. Here's a picture of some galaxies out wherever. This is the mathematician and biologist Darcy Wentworth Thompson. This is the Gnostic tradition of faith. So
That's a beautiful woodcut.
yeah. So here we go. This is what we did. This is where we were. First thing I did was I looked at all the videos and I came up with, we had an actual balance here. The title is Mysticism, where Science, Art, and Spirituality Meet. We had 15 science-oriented classes, 13 art-oriented classes, and 16 spirituality classes. So that to me is, kind of a good balance.
Yeah,
I don't
not
know
bad.
how it happened that way, but it did. I was kind of dumbfounded when I saw this.
Accidentally on
Yeah.
purpose.
So here we go. How in the world did I ever get involved in doing this? So in 1970, which last time I looked was 55 years ago, hard to believe, when I was in graduate school at MIT, Roger Brockett, who was on my doctoral committee as an advisor, asked me to look at exterior calculus. And when he asked me this, I had no idea what he was talking about. So it turns out exterior calculus was developed by Hermann Grossmann. This is Hermann here, good-looking German, in the 1830s and 1840s as a natural generalization of scalar calculus, where he used the gradient operator to go to vectors or even multi-vectors, as you'll see in this thing. So I didn't know anything, so I said, okay, so let's see what's going on here. So I took a coordinate system which had space and time in it, three dimensions for space, X, Y, and Z, and the time dimension, I just fudged it by saying, well, we have time, we'll multiply it by the speed of light, so that now we have distance, just like X, Y, and Z, but we're going to make it multiplied by the square root of -1, so that it's perpendicular in this sense to the other three spatial dimensions. So that's going to be our basic coordinate system. And so then I just took a function of X, Y, Z, and ICT, and these are actually complex functions. So by that I mean that there's a real part, a scalar function, and then there's a second scalar function, but it's multiplied by the square root of -1. So I had these complex functions, and I just started turning the crank to see what would happen. And the scalar function has a term in physics. It's called a gauge function. And so I identified this with electric and magnetic gauges that show up in Maxwell's equations. And then by computing its exterior derivative or its gradient, I get a complex vector potential. So all of the things you've ever heard of about potentials for voltages show up here. So great, so we did that. So now we're going to turn the crank one more time. And if I take the gradient of the gradient or the exterior derivative of the exterior derivative of the vector potential, I end up with all the electric and magnetic fields that Maxwell had. And then if I do this one more time, taking the exterior derivative of the fields, I end up with current densities, magnetic and electric current densities. And then finally, if I do it one final time, I end up with complex electric and magnetic sources. So these are the sources that provide the currents. The currents generate the fields, and the fields end up creating these potentials all over the place. So there you go. they're just,
Proves that God is in it.
yeah.
All right.
The math is the language of the universe, because but and I just summarized this here. Here's the exterior derivative of the gauge to give us the vector potential. Vector potential gives us electric and magnetic fields, current densities, electric and magnetic sources. And so there's this progression. Every time I take an exterior derivative, I end up with one of these things. Now, here's what struck me. This is back in 1970. There was absolutely no physics associated with any of this. All of these equations that Maxwell produced were based on all kinds of experiments that people had done over the preceding, 200 years. And that led to Maxwell writing down these equations. But Grossman here wrote down the equations with no physics. He just did what I said here. So there's no physics whatsoever to get these equations, which is very disturbing, to put it mildly. And the other thing is, because this thing goes, you can see it goes gauge to vector potential, the magnetic field, the density, the sources. This leads to what's called a commutative diagram that the mathematician Grothendieck popularized. You can view this in terms of algebra. So that was a novel contribution to show that there was a commutative diagram, but there still was no physics. So what this suggests, and this is what I got from talking with Ron Cohen to his colleague Emmy Noether. I asked several times, well, what comes out of these equations is there's an identity that's well known, the speed of light squared times the susceptibility of the magnetic fields times the permittivity of the electric fields equals 1. Okay, and so this is really bizarre because the speed of light is that means light is moving, but these other things, susceptibility and permittivity, are measured. They're DC measurements. There's no velocity whatsoever. So how can I have some velocity coupled to some things that don't involve any velocity, and the product of all of them equals 1, no less? And what Emmy said several times was, well, there's really nothing interesting in this. It's just a combinatorial identity due to the geometry of space-time. And you can see that because these equations have nothing to do with physics, that the physicists were all trying to show this. It's not for the physicists, it's for the mathematicians to go show this, because there's no physics whatsoever involved in this. And all of this was published. I wrote up a paper on this. It was published in 1974, which was 51 years ago. And so I let it sit. I didn't do anything with it. But I remembered this, and I was always puzzled as to how this came about.
It seems to me, as a layperson looking in from the outside, it just proves the underlying mathematical nature of reality, or our way of
Yeah,
understanding.
what it's saying to me is that mathematics truly is the language of the universe. It's a strange language. It's not one we speak, but it captures these things. So, the basis for everything we do with electricity and magnetism, is how we live every day. So it's not a minor thing, but what in the world is it?
It seems to be how it's created.
Yeah, it's integral to this. And I have a feeling that when we go back and look at this, we'll see that there's a way to say do what Emmy Noether showed by doing some pretty high-powered math, which I don't want to go into here, but I think I have an idea of how you could actually do this. So we're going to skip that now and go to fast forward to 2005, which is only 20 years ago. And I was approached out of the blue by a very gifted individual who just contacted me, said, "Oh, I see your website and what you're doing. I want to meet you." And so I met him at a diner and we had a cup of coffee. And he pulled out this monograph by Arnold Sommerfeld. Arnold Sommerfeld is shown here. And Arnold Sommerfeld was in Munich and had as students Heisenberg, Pauli, Max Born, who was also heavily involved, all in the creation of quantum mechanics. So Sommerfeld himself had 4 students that each received a Nobel Prize in physics. So he's no slouch. And he had the book that this guy brought along. Sommerfeld decided toward the end of his life to summarize everything he knew about physics, and he wrote an 8-volume series. Each book deals with thermodynamics or differential equations or whatever, and this was the book on electromagnetism. So in this book, he opens it up. On the left-hand page that he's got it open to, there's the free space equations for electromagnetism, the ones that I had come up with through exterior calculus. And on the right-hand page, there are the equations for fluid mechanics, for a fluid that was incompressible and there was no friction. So it was called a perfect fluid. And the only thing about the fluid mechanics equations was there was a new term in there for the density of the fluid as it varied in space and time. So the 2 sets of equations, Maxwell's equations on the left-hand side and the equations of fluid mechanics on the right-hand side, were identical in form, but there are a few extra terms for the fluid mechanics ones. So what this guy had suggested, and I'm sure Sommerfeld did this too, was he said, okay, I'm going to just look at this. And what he did was he carried out what's called a power series or a perturbation expansion in the power of the density of the fluid. Now here, the fluid that we're talking about is the ether of space, the quantum foam that makes up the space all around us. And this foam, is really the density is very low. I mean, I sit there and rub my fingers together. I don't feel a lot. That's space. So if you do this power series in the density of the ether, you have a 0th order term, a 1st order term, a 2nd order term. They're all the density to the 1st power, the density, 2nd power, the density, 3rd power. So you can do all this. And the 0th order term are the Maxwell's equations. End of story. But if you go take the 1st and 2nd order terms, then what you discover is that they come up with a strong force. So at very short distances, similar charges attract, such as protons that are positively charged in the nucleus of atoms. When they get close enough together, they attract one another. When they get far enough away, they repel one another. So hard as it is to believe, the thing flips totally. And there's also the weak force in the nucleus of an atom. You have neutrons, and every so often they decay into a proton, an electron, and a neutrino. And so since the neutrons decayed, you have an extra proton there in the nucleus, and that creates what's called an isotope. So all of the forces that are known in electromagnetism, strong force, weak force, and all the forces are all covered in this analysis here. But on top of that, gravity shows up simply as the change in density of the ether. The more dense the ether, the greater the gravity. The less dense the ether, the less the gravity. And so it goes. So now this is interesting because I'd never seen this before, and it wasn't a heavy duty to go do. And undoubtedly, Sommerfeld used this to help the Nazis in World War II. So that's how I got involved. Now it's Marjorie's turn.
Let's see if I can read this from here. Well, the glasses make it worse. In 2002, Marjorie had been a Jungian astrologer since the early 90s and also did freelance copy editing, research, and writing. When she was invited by the academic publisher, then known as the Gale Group, to now they're Gale Cengage, to research and contribute an original essay on the work of Darcy Wentworth Thompson. Thompson argued that Darwin had made a good start toward understanding how life has evolved over time, but was missing quite a lot. So my essay is linked there. We've done a class on it at one point. We're just going to summarize it all here now. Thompson is remembered as the author of the 1917 book on growth and form, which I thought was a fabulous book. It's about this thick, which led the way for the scientific explanation of morphogenesis, specifically the process by which patterns and body structures are formed in plants and animals based on various mathematical principles inherent in nature more than anything else. And a lot of his work focused on spirals and things like the Fibonacci sequence. I'm finding that in everything from galaxies to snails. Thompson's descriptions of the mathematical beauty of nature and the mathematical basis of the forms of animals and plants stimulated thinkers as diverse as you read them, okay?
Julian Huxley, C.H. Waddington, Alan Turing, René Thom, who's a French mathematician who did fundamental work in what we now call chaos theory, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Edward Paoli, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Eduardo Paolozzi, Le Corbusier, Christopher Alexander, and Mies van der Rohe. So this is a pretty heavy-duty class of people that he's dealing with, having influenced.
Whoops. Well, that got up too high. Astrology is a symbolic system that interprets the positions and movements of celestial bodies. By that we mean the sun, moon, planets, and stars, to observe and understand the correspondences with individual human personality traits, life events, trends, and relationships. For example, birth charts. Astrologers create a birth chart based on the precise positions of celestial bodies at the moment of the individual's birth. Now, the planets are called the travelers. That's what the word planet means. And the stars are the fixed stars. So, for the most part, we have the planets moving against the backdrop of the stars, which are no longer in the same position as the zodiac signs. And that's because of the precession of the equinox. But you could think of it that way, that the fixed stars are the zodiac stars and the planets are the moving stars. So the positions of the celestial bodies are interpreted within the context of the zodiac as a fixed field of reference, a belt of 12 constellations through which the sun, moon, and planets appear to move. And influences, we're going to put that in quotes because most modern astrologers don't believe that it's literally physically influencing things. On the contrary, we believe that the archetypal type of astrologers, which I am, believe that the synchronistic alignment of these bodies and their relationships to one another in the birth chart can reveal insights into a person's character, patterns, future, and life path. We feel there's some mysterious relationship between them, but we're not sure that it's causal, or if it is, how it operates. So I became involved in this after studying transformational astrology for about 3 years, starting in the late 80s, and transpersonal psychology for another 2. I focused my studies on the work of Jung at the Jung Institute in New York City. And that was really why I studied astrology, because I wanted to understand his work more. And I knew that he was deeply steeped in astrology and quote unquote believed in it. So he was a Swiss psychiatrist, which means he was an MD. He was also a psychotherapist and a psychologist, which they're usually divided these days, those roles, but some people combine them, who founded the School of Analytical Psychology. And it's been shown that he made birth charts for just about every one of his clients. He didn't discuss the charts with the clients, but he did it for his own reference. If they wanted a discussion, he would refer them to an astrologer. And most of us are taught not to do both, not to do therapy and somebody's chart with the same person. And I've always adhered to that. He was a prolific author of more than 20 books. They're still being uncovered and translated and published today. And he died in 61. He was an illustrator. He did beautiful artwork. A very committed, diligent correspondent with many people. He was a complex and convoluted academic, best known for his concepts of archetypes and synchronicity that really came together with astrology. Alongside contemporaries Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, Jung became one of the most influential psychologists of the early 20th century and has fostered not only scholarship, but also popular interest. After studying astrology, I didn't put anything in here about Kabbalah, which I had studied also.
Okay, we'll put it in.
So it's all in there. It's all in the soup. Labyrinths are found on every single continent and every epoch on Earth. They seem to encompass every culture. So that's truly an archetype. That's what Jung would define as an archetype. They're universal.
Well, yeah, we have a picture up here of Marjorie's 24-foot canvas labyrinth. It's at an art museum nearby, and so you can see. Here's
standing behind it.
Yeah,
with the woman.
Here's Marjorie. Here's me, and here's our sponsor at the art museum. These are works of art.
This is in Ridgefield.
And this is a mandala, which is.
Well, that's like a Greek or a Roman version of a labyrinth, but it's the unicursal type. It's the one path in and the same path back out. And so they can be square, they can be round, they can be various shapes. But they're found in Native American cultures all over Europe, all over Scandinavia, Latin America, I mean, everywhere. Baskets are made in this formation and, they're ubiquitous. So I just tip my hand. A labyrinth has one path into the center and you come back out the same way. Whereas a maze can have numerous dead ends to get lost in. Walking the labyrinth is a kind of walking meditation. We say in the shorthand, a maze is to get lost in, to lose yourself in, but a labyrinth is to find yourself in. Rather than getting lost and confused, the idea is to get centered and clear, and tune out the noise of everyday life, linking with the collective unconscious, the divine, your higher self, whatever that means to you, in the center. The idea is to find oneself rather than getting lost. This link doesn't show up on this background, but
Well,
that
I'll change
says
it. It says the Reverend Dr. Lauren Artress repopularized labyrinths at Chartres Cathedral in France.
after walking for years, Marjorie was personally trained to be a labyrinth facilitator by Lauren. I should say Dr. Artress to be more respectful in public. In 2003, and it has two portable canvas labyrinths. One is 8 feet for children, and this is the 24-foot one pictured above. And she uncovered the labyrinth, which was covered with chairs at Chartres Cathedral and just being ignored like it never existed. And she led the charge in getting it uncovered and people paying attention at the cathedral. They weren't paying any attention at the cathedral. So she's been really a seminal influence in the whole movement. Another thing that Bart and I had in common when we started wanting to work together in what year was it? 2020?
Yeah.
2019. 2019. We had both separately read this wonderful book called Hamlet's Mill. It's an essay investigating the origins of human knowledge and its transmission through myth by one scholar, Giorgio di
Santillana,
a professor of the history of science at MIT. And is it Hertha?
Hertha von Deckend.
Okay. Yeah, we see it. A professor of the history of science at some Wolfgang Goethe Universität in Frankfurt, Germany. And it's a nonfiction work of the history of science and comparative mythology, particularly the subfield of archaeoastronomy. And it's primarily about the possibility of a Neolithic era or earlier discovery of axial precession of the equinoxes and the transmission of that knowledge in mythology, which really seems to be the case. It's called Hamlet's Mill because so many cultures have a history of mythology about this theme that shows up in Hamlet, which comes from an ancient Danish myth of a nephew superseding his uncle in the like a chain of command that seems to be about the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn, if you look at it the right way. And it's got wonderful illustrations. It's, again, another really thick, huge, juicy book. And we had both read that and the Tao of Physics. This was published in 1975. It brought the mystical implications of subatomic physics to popular consciousness for the very first time. Many books have been written in the ensuing years about the connections between quantum theory and the ideas of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, but Fritjof Capra's text serves as the foundation on which the others have been built, and its wisdom has stood the test of time. Its publication in more than 23 languages stands testimony to its universal applicability and its enduring significance. Bart has had some correspondence with him. Physicists do not need mysticism, Dr. Capra says, and mystics do not need physics, but humanity needs both. It's a message of timeless importance.
So now we go into our class, and we had a basic theme through all the years. There's a single unifying collective unconscious, and we always point to the parable of the blind men and the elephants. Each blind man touches a piece of the elephant, claims to know what the animal is. The one touches the trunk, another the tusk, another the ear, another the leg, another the tail, another the skin on the side, and each argues with the others, but all of them miss the point that there's an elephant there, and none of them truly see what's going on in its entirety. So here we go. And we also picked up on Albert Einstein, and Einstein was very much into spirituality. Uh, and so we captured just some of his thoughts here. For example, I think 99 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, I swim in silence, and suddenly the truth comes to me. Or a human being experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest. This is a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is kind of a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection uh, for a few persons nearest to us. We've got to free ourselves from this prison and widen our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. And our separation from each other is an optical illusion. So he's saying reality is merely an illusion. It's a very persistent one, but it's still an illusion. And we're souls dressed up in the sacred biochemical garments, which are our bodies, and our bodies are the instruments through which our souls play their music. So when you look at very influential people that have walked the planet Earth, they've been aligned first with their spiritual nature and only later with their physical selves. The ancients knew something which we seem to have forgotten, and the more I learn of physics, the more I'm drawn to metaphysics, and so forth. I'm not an atheist. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We're in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone else must have written those books. So the common idea that I'm an atheist is based on a big mistake. Anyone who interprets my scientific theories this way did not really understand them. So whenever Einstein gave lectures at US universities, the students typically asked him, "Do you believe in God?" And he always answered, "I believe in the God of Spinoza." Baruch de Spinoza was a Dutch philosopher, considered one of the great rationalists of the 17th century, along with Descartes. So Spinoza would say, God would say, stop praying. What I want you to do is go out into the world and enjoy your life. I want you to sing, have fun, enjoy everything I've made for you. Stop going into those dark, cold temples that you built yourself and you're saying are my house. My house is in the mountains. It's in the woods, the rivers, the lakes, the beaches. That's where I live, and there I express my love for you. I am pure love. Stop blaming me for your miserable life. I never told you there was anything wrong with you, or that you were a sinner, or that your sexuality was a bad thing. Sex is a gift I've given you, and with which you can express your love, your ecstasy, your joy. So don't blame me for everything they made you believe. And stop reading alleged sacred scriptures that have nothing to do with me. If you can't read me in a sunrise, in a landscape, in the look of your friends, in your son's eyes, you'll find me in no book. Stop asking me, will you tell me how to do my job? Stop being so scared of me. I do not judge you or criticize you, nor get angry or bothered. I am pure love. Stop asking for forgiveness. There's nothing to forgive. If I made you, I filled you with passions, limitations, pleasures, feelings, needs, inconsistencies, and free will. How can I blame you if you respond to something I put in you? How can I punish you for being the way you are if I'm the one who made you? Do you think I could create a place to burn all my children who behave badly for the rest of eternity? What kind of a God would do that? Respect your peers and don't do what you don't want for yourself. You're absolutely free to create in your life, heaven or hell. I can't tell you if there's anything after this life, but I can give you a tip. Live as if there is not, as if this is your only chance to enjoy, to love, to exist. So if there's nothing after, then you will have enjoyed the opportunity I gave you. And if there is, rest assured, I won't ask you if you behaved right or wrong. I'll ask, did you like it? Did you have fun? What did you enjoy the most? What did you learn? And stop believing in me. Believing is assuming, guessing, imagining. I don't want you to believe in me. I want you to believe in you. I want you to feel me in you when you kiss your beloved, when you tuck in your little girl, when you caress your dog, and when you bathe in the sea. And so there you have it. So now we'll go into, we always started with this discussion led by Einstein and Spinoza. This year we covered Maria Popova, a Bulgarian who has moved to New York City, and she has a website called The Marginalian, and she writes essays, she curates all kinds of materials that is really quite in tune with what we're trying to express in our class. And so we picked up on what she's doing and we circulate from time to time. She sends out emails with here's the thought for the week and so forth. So in particular, she liked Annie Dillard. Here's a picture of Annie Dillard, who was an American author who writes narrative prose, both fiction and nonfiction. She's written poetry, essays, prose, and literary criticism, two novels, and one memoir. And her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, won a Pulitzer Prize. And she taught for 21 years in the English department at Wesleyan in Middletown, Connecticut, which is about an hour from here. Really a very interesting, thought-provoking writer that shows you what Maria Popova picks up on.
I think of just an incredibly mystical way of looking at nature.
Right.
That's really what she does. She just kind of opens it up in this different way. And she's not talking about some puppet master creating it from outside. She's showing the complexity and the intricacy and the um, miraculousness of it, kind of from this inside out view.
Right. A different person is Maya Angelou, American memoirist, poet, and civil rights activist. She published 7 autobiographies, 3 books of essays, several books of poetries, and there's a whole list of plays, movies, and television shows that span 50 years. She's received dozens of awards and more than 50 honorary degrees. Her series of 7 autobiographies focus on her childhood and early adult experiences. The very first of these, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, in 1969, tells of her life up to the age 17, and this brought her international recognition and acclaim. And so that's an example. We also love Emily Dickinson, an American poet who was little known in her lifetime. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, virtually her whole life.
She's claimed as a Unitarian mystic.
Right. And she's considered actually to be one of the greatest American poets. She was a very prolific writer, but the only publications during her lifetime were 1 letter and 10 of her nearly 1,800 poems. The poems that were published then were usually edited significantly to fit conventional rules of poetry. And her poems are unique for her era. They contain short lines, typically lack titles, often use slant rhyme, as well as unconventional capitalization and punctuation. So many of her poems deal with the themes of death and immortality, 2 recurring topics in letters to her friends, aesthetics, society, nature, and spirituality. There's very few pictures of Emily Dickinson. This is like the best one we've got. And then we have Walt Whitman, an American poet, essayist, and journalist who wrote 2 novels. He's considered one of the most influential poets in American and world literature. He incorporated both transcendentalism and realism in his writings and is often called the father of free verse. His work was controversial in his time, particularly his 1855 poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, which was described by some as obscene for its overt sensuality. And he did revision after revision of Leaves of Grass until he died in 1892.
And he was also considered to be a Unitarian mystic.
Right. In the Civil War, he was a nurse. He did not fight. He was an objector.
Conscientious objector.
Yeah. So, and we touched on this year in music, what's been discovered with all of these different possible tomography technologies that allow you to do nuclear magnetic resonance or X-ray tomography of your brain. It's been discovered that music stimulates the brain's pleasure center, which includes the nucleus accumbens. And it does this when you get a music you really like, it releases dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter associated with happiness and reward. Now, this is the same area of the brain that you get stimulated from sex, from drugs, from rock and roll, you name it, it's all there. And this neurochemical response is why listening to music can make us feel euphoric and cause chills when listening to preferred music. The brain can even anticipate pleasure peaks in familiar music, which trigger, this is just as the music comes on, you get a big rush of dopamine here. So music is a key part of spirituality. We dealt with Carl Jung's Answer to Job. Jung wrote virtually nothing about religion, except for this. The Answer to Job was something he did it's a short monograph, and he argues that the book of Job reveals God, or Yahweh, with a dark, unconscious side, who commits a terrible injustice against Job's moral integrity. Job was minding his own business, and God took a bet with the devil, and the devil said, "I bet I can get Job to turn against you." The devil lost, but he should have never done this in the first place. Jung posits that God had to become incarnated as Christ to redeem himself. The book of Job is in the not Genesis, but it's there in the early sections of the Old Testament, so it's quite old, and God had to incarnate as Christ. This redemption must be completed by the future second incarnation of God's evil side within humanity, which will require the Holy Spirit to enter the empirical, sinful human world. And so there you get an idea of the diversity of what Jung actually dealt with. Of all the things he could write on religion, he chose this.
Again, he's writing about it in an archetypal sense.
Right.
He's saying that this is actually part of our collective psyche that, kind of coagulated as this image of the Christos from our collective unconscious, and that was cumulative in response to this side of God that we see most, clearly in the story of Job. He was tormenting this poor man. He's not saying that Job, was literally an individual that he owes this debt to, but he means in our evolution, we create the archetypes, and the archetypes create us.
That's right.
And they don't come from any one individual. Nobody makes it up as a story by themselves, but it percolates in the collective, through our myths and stories, and these biblical stories have a special potency. But that God decided to incarnate as a human to understand what it is to be limited, because as infinite, God, whatever that is, as the collective, can't experience limitation. So being infinite is its own limitation. So he had to understand what it was to be limited. So it's kind of like the Simpson creating this vacated space
Right.
in order to create within something. Because for us to understand it, we need a concept of containment. So Christ is like the vacated space. But he sees Christ as an archetype. He sees it as the Christos. This is an ancient Greek concept. He doesn't mean some guy Jesus in 4 BC, although he did seem to embody it. It does seem like, and I don't know to what extent it's literally true.
Right. Oh, that's good. We stressed the role of women, and in particular Mary Magdalene, in the Nag Hammadi scriptures that were uncovered after World War II. There was the Gospel of Mary, and Mary Magdalene has a very small role in the canonical Gospels, but she's always there. She traveled with Jesus as one of his followers. She witnessed his crucifixion, and she was one of the women that went to his tomb and saw the stone rolled back. So she's clearly there. The church, the Catholic Church, chose to, uh, if you will, doctor her importance. But what it appears happened is that Mary Magdalene actually was one of the closest disciples of Jesus, and she uniquely understood his teachings, which caused a great deal of tension with Peter because she was probably smarter than Peter and could understand very deep concepts. She'd been schooled in Isis in Egypt for many years, and uh, if anything, she would be the first pope, not Peter. But of course, she's a woman, and so the Catholic Church doctored it because, of course, men have to hold these roles. But she's the apostle to the apostles. She apparently, after the crucifixion, lived in the south of France and ended up having every summer in Cyprus a for 10 years uh, a colloquium where she would discuss the teachings of Jesus for the apostles and for anyone else who wanted to come there. Cyprus was because that's where Joseph of Arimathea had the headquarters of his business, and it was therefore sponsored by Joseph of Arimathea. But she was truly amazing, and we're trying to bring out how important her role was in all of this. She apparently had two girls and a boy as part of her marriage to Jesus, and you can see her marriage because it's in the New Testament when Jesus is there and he goes and he's approached by the people serving the wine, and they say, "We're running out of wine." Well, the reason they're going to Jesus is because he's the groom, and he's the one who's required to produce the wine for the wedding. So he goes ahead and he turns the water into wine, and he's told, "Well, this wine is much better than the stuff that you started out with." Normally people have the good stuff at the start, and then they get lower and lower quality. You've done the opposite. They never mention he's marrying Mary Magdalene. Uh, their only other thing here, their daughter Sarah, the oldest, actually apparently went to Asia Minor and created a number of parishes there, and they their bloodline continued to live uh, down through history. As it actually went to Scotland with the Sinclairs, and then to the U.S. Another woman we dealt with was Hildegard von Bingen, who was the Sibyl of the Rhine. Bingen is on the Rhine. She was a Benedictine abbess. She was active as a writer, a composer. She's one of the best-known composers of sacred music. She's the most recorded one in modern history. She's got 10 times the amount of stuff available in recordings. You can go onto YouTube and see many, many recordings of her work. And she's also considered to be probably the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. She wrote about viriditas, which is uh, it draws on green. Verdant is the Latin root, and the fact that it's the fact of it. She was very knowledgeable in plants and as a medical writer of all of this stuff.
She was fascinated by photosynthesis, which, when you think about what it does for oxygen on the planet, with, carbon dioxide, and, it is miraculous. It is incredible. She named her, uh, the, the woman who introduced me and many others to modern labyrinths named her organization Viriditas, for Hildegard.
Yeah. Here we have Darcy Wentworth Thompson with his book on growth and form, 1917, arguing that biologists were overemphasizing evolution and that they were emphasizing the roles of physical laws and mechanics. And so he previously criticized Darwin, but this went into detail uh, about how Darwinism really seemed to be inadequate for the origins of new species. He didn't openly reject natural selection, but he regarded it as secondary to the origin of the biological forms. Really an amazing individual.
She saw it as mathematical and geometric,
Right.
rather than just some divine
Right.
miracle out of the blue.
So he advocated structuralism or forms or patterns as an alternative to natural selection in governing the form of species. And he hinted here that vitalism was some sort of unseen driving force that made all this happen. So an organism is so complex a thing and growth so complex a phenomenon. For growth to be so uniform and constant in all the parts as to keep the whole shape unchanged would indeed be unlikely. And so rates vary, proportions change, and the whole configuration alters accordingly. So as an example, when you have an egg and a sperm get together to create a cell, which is the very first cell of a human embryo, they continue to divide repeatedly, and you get up to 50, 100, 200 cells. All of a sudden, it changes, and some of the cells start to specialize. Some of them become bone cells, become skin cells, become muscle cells, and on and on. And that's what he's talking about here. is that the growth isn't uniform. That's how it happens. This was picked up on at Yale by Harold Burr, and he did a bunch of really amazing experiments, but it was during he noticed that uh, electricity was an integral part of biology, and so he said for living fields, we'll call the electric field an L field, and he went ahead and measured a variety of things like growing corn, and that electricity seemed to bridge the gap between the lifeless world and living matter. It's one of the fundamental factors in all living systems, and so forth. And he contributed to the electrical detection of cancer cells, experimental embryology, neuroanatomy, and the regeneration and development of the nervous system. So his studies of the bioelectrics of ovulation, menstruation, eventually led to marketing of fertility indicating devices, and he had late studies looking at trees, which were carried out over decades, showing how they grew. Uh, After him was Robert Becker, who was at Syracuse and started up after World War II. He wrote a book called The Body Electric. You can get it on the web. It's free as an Acrobat file. And the first part of the book discussed regeneration, primarily in salamanders and frogs. He was trying to figure out how, if you chopped off a leg or an arm of a frog or a salamander, they would regrow one. Well, why can't we do that? So he studied regeneration with limb amputation, and he hypothesized that electric fields played an important role in controlling this regeneration process. And he mapped the electric potentials during regeneration and showed that the central part of the body normally had a positive voltage while the limbs were negative. And finally, we come to Michael Levin, who has picked up on all of this stuff. He's at Tufts University outside of Boston, and he is picking up on the ideas of Darcy Wentworth Thompson, of Burr, of Becker, and many others. He has a very strong computer science background as well. And his website is just amazing. I expect he someday will get a Nobel Prize in biology, but what he's doing is so far away from the mainstream, which is very much with genetics and genomics and things related to biochemistry, that it'll take a while for people to realize that what he's doing is so critical.
He really is like an heir of Darcy Wentworth Thompson.
Right. We have another woman, Helena Blavatsky, who was a mystic born in Russia, emigrated to the United States, and founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. I think that was in New York City, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Originally, yes.
And she gained an international following as the primary founder of Theosophy. And according to her claims, in 1849, she embarked on a series of world travels in Europe, the Americas, and India, and claimed during this period she encountered a group of spiritual adepts, which she called the Masters of Ancient Wisdom, who sent her to Tibet, where they trained her to develop a deeper understanding of the synthesis of religion, philosophy, and science. You want to?
I just have to admit, I studied Kabbalah for about 4 years at the Theosophical Society in New York. And I really didn't understand what theosophy was about at all. And they didn't pressure us to pursue it. And I wish I um, had more of an interest at the time and learned more. But they hosted those classes. I can't remember if we even paid, or I think they were very reasonable, and we did pay, but we could meet 3 or 4 times a week if we wanted to. You know, we met in the library, and um, they really supported my teacher to share what he had put together from his own pursuits in Western esoteric systems. And he had studied with a Hasidic rabbi in Brooklyn as well. And I had my proposal to teach an astrology class there was accepted in 2001, but something was telling me really persistently to get out of Dodge. And I think 3 students signed up, and I was holding out for 4. So I got out of teaching it because only 3 signed up, and I moved to Vermont. I went there over the spring. I was kind of moving gradually from my apartment in downtown Manhattan to southern Vermont. And I didn't really know why until that September 11th, and I uh, saw it on TV. But they were very hospitable to us and didn't have any dogmatic, demands or anything.
So you
So
want to do the astrology?
I guess
I think actually we covered.
we had another version of this.
Yeah,
So what happened to that?
I don't know. It disappeared. Yeah, I think we've covered this elsewhere. We did go into this mathematician, Srinivasa Ramanujan, who was regarded as one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, but he had no formal training. And he apparently had these dreams, and he would see this board there, and things would be written on the board, and he would record these things. He would write them down and so forth. And what he did was, to put it mildly, off the charts. So he lived as you can see, from 1887 to 1920. He sent his works off to some mathematicians in England, and one of them, G.H. Hardy, who was an outstanding mathematician in analysis and so forth. You get this package of stuff from him, and he started looking at these things, and he said, "Where in the world did this stuff come from? It's so off the charts. It's undoubtedly got to be true, but there's no proofs for this stuff." He was just going through these things. So he asked Ramanujan to take a boat to England, which he did, and he spent time with Ramanujan on mathematical analysis, number theory, all kinds of things related to solutions of mathematical problems that were considered unsolvable. And the consensus is that he might have lived in the earliest 20th century, but his work is really going to have its greatest impact in the 21st century. He has a number of his works have been collected together. After his death, it was discovered there were 3,000 different, I'll just say, equations or theorems that he put together. And over a period of several decades, several mathematicians developed proofs for all these. Well, how in the world could this guy have written this stuff down? And it takes these other people decades to go do it, and he just kept banging these things out. So Hardy was aware of, all of the caliber of mathematics that was taking place in the world in 1910, so forth. And he said, look, the greatest mathematician there in Europe is David Hilbert, and he would give Hilbert a score of 80 on a scale of 1 to 100. He'd give himself, he was being very modest, a 25, okay? But he said Ramanujan was 100. Ramanujan was so far beyond me, and Hilbert wasn't even close. And they have no idea what this guy knew.
He died really young of tuberculosis, right?
Yeah.
But they brought him to, it was Cambridge, not.
Yeah, he was in Cambridge, England, which is where Hardy and his colleague Littleward were. Then we dealt with another chap. This is an American, Walter Russell. He was an amazing painter and artist and sculptor, but what was truly amazing was he had an event in May of 1921, which he called he wrote a book called The Story of My Illumining. And during that period, I could perceive all motion, and I was newly aware of all things. So he's using the terminology of someone named Richard Maurice Buck in his book, Cosmic Consciousness, to explain cosmic illumination. And he later wrote, "It'll be remembered that no one who has ever had the experience of illumination has been able to explain it. I deem it my duty to the world to tell of it." And this became the subject of his book, The Divine Iliad, which was published in 2 volumes in 1949. But he wrote many other books along the way, and he really is considered to be an American mystic with some amazing ideas about things. We push forward all the way to today. Edward Frankel, who's a Russian who left Russia and is now in the faculty at the University of California at Berkeley. But he wrote a very thought-provoking book called Love and Math, The Heart of Hidden Reality in 2013. And it was reviewed, and it contains 3 things: a platonic love letter to mathematics, an attempt to give the layman some idea of its most magnificent drama in progress, and an autobiography, by turns inspiring and droll, how the author himself came to be a leading player in that drama. And the book is definitely worth reading. It gives you an idea of how math is done, and also why he left Russia, what the environment was. He unfortunately was Jewish, and even back 30 years ago, the Russians were anti-Semitic. He has a podcast that you can pick up on the web, Aftermath. Our minds are all connected by math. So he views math as linking everything, which there might be some element of truth in that. Following Jung, he proposes that all mathematical objects and ideas come from archetypes in our collective unconscious, which is a common psychic realm to which all individual minds are connected. And so he goes off to talk about this and building it up with the notion of archetypes and special attention to things like the shadow, and on and on. And so it's a very interesting podcast that is worth picking up on. One of the things we came up with here with Ron Cohen, Bruce's brother, was we came up with a picture of the universe, and it has 26 real dimensions to it. Now, what happened in roughly the same time frame in the 2005 time frame was, after, I'd say, 170 years, mathematicians were able to categorize different types of symmetries. They're called groups, and there are see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, if I did this correctly, basic categories of symmetries here that came up. And that's interesting, because one of the things that led to physics having all kinds of advances was a periodic table of elements was developed, where here is hydrogen, here is helium, here's lithium, here is boron, and so forth. And the way that these things are arranged suggested to physicists what the underlying parts of the atom were, and so forth. So the question is, we have this periodic table of symmetries up here, and what does this have to do with anything? Well, it turns out that there's 26 types of symmetries. There are 13 here and another 13 here. And these don't fit into these categories up here. They're called sporadic or exceptional, but they don't fit. But we have 26 dimensions, 26 real dimensions to our universe. So the question is there some match here between these 26 exceptional or sporadic groups and the 26 dimensions that our universe has? And we leave that as an open issue. We don't know the answer, but whenever you see something like this in mathematics, inevitably what happens is you discover there really is a linkage there that's being reflected in the math of the physical world. And
Talk about Elena Blavatsky and what's his name in their table of.
well, the Annie Besant and
Yeah, it was
Carl Charles Leadbeater made observations of each of the elements. They went to museums and would look at these things, and each of them checked. They would look at an element that was there and count how many what are called subquarks were there in the nucleus of each of the atoms. And the hierarchy goes that the nucleus of everything is made up of protons and neutrons, but the protons and neutrons are each made up of three subquarks, three different types of subquarks for the protons versus the neutrons. And then the quarks themselves are made up of subquarks. The three subquarks make a quark, three quarks make a proton or neutron. So they were counting subquarks, and they came up with their own version of the periodic table of elements, which extended this version that we see here in certain ways. And we haven't gone back and explored that, but that was key work. So
they anticipated the discovery
oh,
of new isotopes
right,
based on the symmetries that they could see in the diagram there. So
right.
they were sketching them in before they were confirmed.
Yeah, the notion of isotopes was unknown. They had a notion of atomic weight, but the atomic weight was effectively based on counting how many protons there were as well as neutrons. And if you have a mix where you have an isotope which has one more proton than the basic element that you're dealing with, you have to average those things. And the averages give you funny numbers. They're not integral numbers anymore. And so people were puzzled about this, and Besant and Leadbeater were the ones that showed what it was due to. And over here, I'm just picking up on what Ron Cowan did with this 26 real dimensional universe, 10 dimensions for matter, 10 for dark matter, and there's 18 compactified dimensions here. And this is where the Jewish mystics came in through the Kabbalah. There were 18 here, but there's 8 holes. The 18 compactified dimensions have 8 holes, so there's really only 10 real dimensions there in the compactified dimensions, and the tree of life has 10 of these Sephiroth in it that reflect what this is. So somehow the Jewish mystics were able to intuit what the structure, the true underlying geometry of the universe was, and it's definitely not what we see. The 3 dimensions that we think we see are just a small piece of the story. There's much more to it. The other thing that Ron did was he observed that information was coding everything. It was everywhere, and that was huge because that allowed you to control all the forces that worked in this arena of the 26 dimensions. And that means you could control time as well as move around in space. Not a minor accomplishment. So I'm going to skip over this and just go here to the thing we stressed was if we did everything with complex numbers instead of having 3 dimensions, 3 spatial dimensions for matter, we have a pair due to another 3 dimensions for dark matter. That's where our soul lives. And so if we pair those together, there's really only 3 complex spatial dimensions, and then 9 of these compactified dimensions. And finally, there's one complex dimension for time. Time has a real and an imaginary part, and that's critical to understanding what's going on. We had a little refresher here.
Where's the Calabi-Yau manifold?
I didn't put it in, did I? We'll see. We'll go forward and see if I put it in. Complex numbers are integral to understanding this. So we have a complex number that has a real number here plus another real number b, but it's multiplied by the square root of -1. And the two of these add up together to give us what we call a complex number. So, you've seen these things because if we asked what are the solution to x squared equals 4, there's two solutions, +2 and -2. If I square either one of these, I get 4. But what happens when I get x squared equals -4? Then I get x equals +2 times the square root of -1 or -2 times the square root of -1. When I square these, I get -4. And just as a more general example, x squared plus 2x plus 5, we end up with x equals -1 plus or minus 3i. And you can plug that in here and you'll see that that zeroes out this equation. So complex numbers are something that we run into all the time, and they're very useful. Here is these compactified dimensions we touched upon, and they basically, you can think of two of these dimensions wrap around the x-axis that we see in space, two around the y and two around the z, and similarly for dark matter, and similarly for the coordinating manifold there that coordinates everything. So, but you can't see these things because they're incredibly small. They're so small. It just is a little pulp in the x direction.
Here we are.
Here is the Calabi-Yau manifold. I knew we had it in here. So these are typically 6 real dimensions or 3 complex dimensions. And here we show one of these 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifolds, but it's in 2 dimensions. It's a projection into 2 dimensions. So, and you can see there's some holes in this thing, holes that exist in it, and this thing evolves over time. This is just a picture in 2 dimensions, and you'll see this thing spin and rotate and go in all kinds of different directions. And directly above it is the tree of life of the Kabbalah with the 10 nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 nodes here that somehow in deep meditation, the very mystic Kabbalists saw what the geometry of the universe was.
This comes out of the flower of life.
Right.
Which we should have an illustration.
Yeah, we should have a picture of the flower of life too.
And every culture is fascinated by it. It's artwork and tiles and things that show these relationships. Right. So they're aware of it.
We touched on time having 2 components, a real and imaginary part. Well, the real component is the time that we seem to be involved with, which is the time of matter. And what's happened in physics is that there's an interpretation of quantum mechanics called the many worlds or the many timelines of quantum mechanics. And the reason for stressing this is that this is a mechanism for how free will arises. So every instant there's a change, that results in a branching. In one universe, there's no change. In the other universe, there is a change. So we show that here by a movie, and we get to this point here, it splits, and one part of the movie doesn't change, and one part of the movie changes. But the change could be simply one electron moving from one energy level to another energy level, and you start to realize that there's trillions upon trillions upon trillions of these timelines there that are creating this. And because each of us has free will, they have some control or shape over these timelines. And when enough people get together, they can group these things together to create a main timeline and perhaps one or two branching timelines that would leave and then come back to it. So
And
that's
Schrodinger's cat.
and that's Schrodinger's cat here in the picture. And so that's the real component of time. Well, the imaginary component of time is the time for dark matter, which is where our soul is. And the dark matter time, we have an Akashic thread. Here you see these threads here. Each one of them is the timeline for your soul. And this goes back many, many lifetimes. And they're all interconnected as part of the collective unconscious. So this single timeline here for each individual includes all the memories associated with all the different incarnations. And so it goes. So time has two components. It's very different than space. In the Akashic thread idea, it comes out of the Sanskrit word for ether or spirit, which is the basis for the essence of all things in the material world. And it's believed to be the subtle energetic substance from which all things emerge. And so when you die and you can recall everything you did in your past life as a review, did you learn anything? What did you do right? What did you do wrong? This thread is what's being consulted because it's the most amazing recording in 3D color holographic. You name it, it's all there of how you're living your life in all the 24 dimensions. The many worlds interpretation that we talked about is simply an interpretation that most physicists now buy into. They think this is the correct interpretation. The problem with it is, what do you do with it? And what they didn't realize is that because of this information that Ron Cowan observed, it can control how these timelines split and go this way and that way. And we can cluster those timelines together to end up with creating a common consensus for what we call time. But that was non-trivial. One of the problems with this is that most physicists haven't done a lot with this in the open literature, but I know in the black side of the budget, there's been considerable work done on this and how you would do things such as travel through time and view past or forward in time. So a modern example of this is the Philadelphia experiment. In the 1930s, Nikola Tesla, shown here, did some theoretical analysis, and somehow he thought it was possible to create a cloak of invisibility. I have no idea how he figured this out. And so here we are in the middle of World War II, 1943. Tesla is really on his deathbed at this point, but he was involved in creating an experiment to cloak a destroyer escort. Here it's showing the USS Eldridge that was in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. So they took this and they wrapped heavy duty, uh, uh, many heavy gauge copper cables around this boat. And the boat had 5 megawatts of electric power that it could generate. And the key thing was Tesla developed a controller. And who knows what that controller did, but he hooked it up to it. He objected violently to the Navy doing this because he said it's still not done yet. And the Navy put a lot of sailors on this ship. So they threw the switch and the ship disappeared in Philadelphia. But it appeared 20 minutes earlier, before they'd thrown the switch, in Hampton Roads, Virginia, in the Naval Yard there in Norfolk, Virginia. And it was there for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then it disappeared from Virginia and reappeared in Philadelphia. The problem with this is that many of the men went insane, or they were caught in when it came back, they were uh, had their arms or legs in the walls, the metal walls of the ship, the bulkheads that were there, and it was just a disaster. And the end result was that nothing was done with this, which is probably okay. We touched on Wolfgang Pauli, a great physicist who got the Nobel Prize for. We mentioned when a neutron decays, you have an electron, a proton, and a neutrino. Well, the neutrino is Pauli invented the term neutrino. He said it's a small neutron, doesn't have any charge, but it's also probably doesn't have any mass. Now we know now that there's several types of neutrinos, and they do have mass, but it's not complicated. But the thing that arose here was Pauli was doing all this work on quantum mechanics in the 1930s. He received an appointment at the ETH, the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule in Zurich, and so he was there. And Jung lived nearby in Zurich on a lake. So Pauli went and visited him, and he said, "Look, you think about things very differently than anybody else. Let's you and I have a dialogue here, and we'll try and see if we can make sense out of this, because the things that were coming out of the experiments in quantum mechanics were so counterintuitive that no one knew how to make any sense of them. The thing that's often cited is the double slit experiment, where there's a foil that has a single slit in it, and electrons are shot through the slit, and they all line up on the other side in a nice little straight line mirroring where the slit is. But when you put in two slits that are close together and shoot the electrons at the two slits, you end up with an interference pattern. You don't end up with two lines there. You end up with an interference pattern that you'd get from a wave going through the two slits. So somehow the electron is both a particle and a wave at the same time. And how in the world do you account for this in physics? There still is no explanation. Ron Cowan observed this and could see that what part of the problem was the electron was coated with information that was scanning. And as soon as it detected there were two slits, it became a wave. There's simply are algorithms that the information holds that force it to do this. Because remember, the information controls reality, controls what's going on. So there was a series of, I think, 80 odd letters that they wrote between 1930 and 1957. Pauli died in 1958. And these letters are all captured here in this book, Atom and Archetype, that are very thought-provoking as to how these two individuals approached problems. Very, very creative. And at the same time, there was a different outcome of this that Jung wrote something called synchronicity. And this came about because when Pauli visited a laboratory of an experimentalist who wanted to show Pauli as a great theoretician their experiment, the experiment would fail. It just happened time and again. No one could have an example where the experiment worked. Somehow Pauli's presence made the experiment fail. As soon as he left, the experiment worked. So Jung chose to call this phenomenon synchronicity. And there was an extreme example where a physicist that was in Göttingen in Germany had his experiment fail one day, but he knew that Pauli couldn't have done it because he was in Zurich. However, a few days later, he got a postcard from Pauli, who was in Copenhagen, saying that he'd taken the train from Zurich to Copenhagen, and in fact, he was in Göttingen for a train stop, and that's exactly when the experiment failed. So the physicist was dumbfounded that Pauli had done all this. So Jung tried to capture this in what he called an acausal theory of what is going on in the world, which is synchronicity. It hasn't received nearly the same press that the many worlds interpretation, the many timelines interpretation has in quantum mechanics, but it bears looking at.
And that is how Jung felt astrology worked.
Right.
Not through straightforward causation, but through synchronicity.
Right. Ron Cowan observed an electron. Well, the electron is spinning like crazy, hundreds of millions of times per second, And he was able to, by using his control of the information, he could stop it. And he made sketches showing here's what the electron looks like. So the electron actually has 10 closed strings, but the strings resonate, so energy is inside this thing, and the energy creates basically a very hard jelly. So you think the electron is a particle. It's not. It's an energy with these strings holding it in due to resonance. But the other thing to keep in mind is the resonance occurs. So it's a torus. It's a donut. If you look down on it, here we're looking down, we see a hole in the middle. So here's this energy here that's here, and the electron itself is coated with these blocks of information that are everywhere. All of this was due to Ron. And just to show you that he's not making this stuff up, Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater did a picture showing what they saw an electron. Well, guess what? This has 10 closed strings. Ron has 10 closed strings. There was another individual called Babbitt in the 1880s who, again, under deep meditation, saw this, which looks remarkably like this and this. There's a bunch of these strings. So people in many ages undoubtedly were able to do this. The issue is always how do you interpret it? Using words, for many people going back more than 100, 200 years, there's no words that would describe this stuff. You'd have no idea what in the world do you call this? But we have a vocabulary today which allows us to deal with those things. And I'm sure that vocabulary is inadequate. They're metaphors for what's really going on. Dark matter, instead of having 10 strings, Ron saw it had 5 closed strings. And there's no nuclear charge, no electric charge with this dark matter. So when you look at the dark matter, it just looks like these subquarks that are of the 5 closed strings resonating, that they form like ferns here, trees, branching trees made up of dark matter, and that's all it is. And then we got into Spinoza. Uh, Spinoza was a Jew. His family was from Portugal, and he ended up in Amsterdam. He lived from 1632 to 77, and he was incredibly bright. He knew Hebrew, he knew Aramaic, he knew Greek, he knew Latin, he knew Dutch clearly, and he studied original manuscripts that were there that had come into Amsterdam. One of the problems with doing this was the Inquisition was in full force, led by the Catholic Church. And so doing anything that didn't mesh to what the Inquisition liked would lead you to great problems. When Spinoza was 20, his father died, and so he took over the family business, but he discovered his father had a whole chest filled up with manuscripts of all sorts. Some of these apparently were from the Nag Hammadi scrolls that people had picked up, and somehow they made their way to Amsterdam as a market for these things. So his father had a whole bunch of these. And so, for example, Spinoza found the Gospel of Mary and realized that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were husband and wife and had 3 kids. Unfortunately, when you try and talk about this stuff in that time, you'll get excommunicated. So at age 23, he was excommunicated by his synagogue, by the Jews, and the excommunication was such that he could not set foot in the synagogue ever again. But furthermore, no Jew could ever talk to him, nor do business with him, nor do anything with him. It was an incredible excommunication, and that was compounded by the Catholic Church that also had its own view of what he was doing and wanted to make sure that none of his books ever, any of his writings ever got out anywhere. But the end result was that he put it all behind himself. And every day he would start off and meditate and then go through the day and try and see what he could learn. And he ended up with a huge body of literature, which was published only toward the end of his life, and which is how we know of him. But he came up with this idea of knowledge having three categories. There's daily life, which is the usual goulash and dogma. Then there's scientific knowledge, which is based on repeatable observations, typically through some sort of experiment. And then the knowledge that comes with the true linkage with the collective unconscious. That is, that everything is linked to everything else. And in that way, you can learn about what's going on. So this suggested what he followed for his daily program. You start the day in link with the collective unconscious in deep meditation. You reflect on all the attacks that are made on you yesterday as an observer. You look at the lessons from these attacks, and then you use these lessons to strengthen your arguments. So even though he was excommunicated, he prospered. That's who he was. We touched on the Kabbalah. You want to say anything about this?
Well, the heading at the top makes reference to the kind of two mainstream schools of thought. The first is the Hebrew Kabbalah, which is spelled with a K and two B's, and then the Kabbalah with a Q and one B is the Western esoteric tradition, which inherited a lot of its knowledge from the Hebrew, but it codified it in its own way. And that's where we get the Kabbalah that's associated with tarot, for example. That's the so-called Christian Kabbalah, only they weren't literally Christian. And so it's an esoteric system that has worked out its correspondences with it's very much the same as the structure of the tarot is based on the same structure in Kabbalah. When I used to teach tarot, that's how I taught it. I didn't teach Kabbalah per se, but I taught the structure of it. So yeah, these things are all true. The traditional Kabbalist is called a makabel or receiver. That refers to the chariot or the vehicle that they're said to live in and travel in, which is your spirit and your body. I like this, that they see the body as part of our vehicle, as well as our personality or our sense of self is in quotes, and it's seen as what gives us the illusion of experience and agency. It's so that the divine can have these experiences, that it needs the illusion of separateness to have, and that's what was going on in the Simpson, which we talked about. And so that's to have your vehicle, or for the divine to have its vehicle of individuation to operate within. And the whole idea is growth and learning, and learning through love.
Yeah, there was a group in Palestine called the Essenes that were probably Kabbalists, and the Essenes were among them had Jesus as a member, and that he was schooled in all of this stuff. And as a different side of things, in Islam, we have the Sufis that undoubtedly went in this direction. They had a little quirk. They went into rapid dances, so they were called whirling dervishes. But it was their way to have this linkage to this collective unconscious that's out there in everything.
And they used to get together and practice together and cross-pollinate.
Yeah.
So here we have the Simpson, the above mentioned Simpson.
Yeah, we touched on Samsung, so you want
to? No, you do it.
So in Samsung, God began the process of creation by limiting the Orion Sof, the infinite light of the Godhead, in order to allow for conceptual space in which these finite realms could exist. And this primordial initial contraction formed a vacant space into which new creative light could beam, and it's denoted by the general reference to Tzimtzum. And in the Kabbalistic interpretation, Tzimtzum gives rise to the paradox of simultaneous divine presence and absence within the vacuum and the resulting creation. So various approaches exist as to how the paradox may be resolved and as to the nature of Tzimtzum itself. It's, again, incredibly mystical. Then we touched upon, there's now been a lot of activity here with talking about the Big Bang and the cosmology that comes out of this. And this intrigued Ron Cowan, so he went into deep meditation and was able to observe the start of our universe. And he confirmed a number of things that modern cosmology believes are there. He showed that there was a Higgs boson for matter and a Higgs boson for dark matter, and both of them were there at the start. And you need those to create actual mass. If the Higgs boson is zero, then there is no mass. You end up with just what we saw before at the very start, this beautiful geometry of space and time, but it's empty. There's nothing in it. But once the Higgs boson kicks in, then all of these different particles that you see end up having masses, and that creates the universe that you see around you. Ron also observed this notion of inflation, that at the very start, these space compartments were all really crunched down and they would rapidly expand 30 orders of magnitude or so, and then would cease, and that created our universe and spread the stars out across the sky so that when we look at the sky, we don't see any clumpings of stars, a lot of stars here and no stars there, that you would expect to see if you had an explosion, a big bang. But the key thing was Ron didn't observe any explosion. What he observed was a big bounce. And so the question arises here, there's all kinds of evidence that there was some sort of thing that happened 13.8 billion years ago that cosmology thinks created this background radiation. And where did it come from? Well, one explanation could be that our universe smashed into another universe then. Our universe could be 1 trillion years old and could have smashed into other universes along the way. And that comes about directly from this notion of inflation and expansion, that we're in a piece of space that expanded and then stopped. But there's other pieces of space that were still expanding. They created other universes again and again and again. So there's probably trillions of universes out there, and each of them is running in between. The question arises, what is in between the universes? Is that space? I mean, what do you call it? But there's something there, and so it goes. So that was another great contribution by Ron.
This idea of the bounce, you see it in the Simpson, this contraction, and expansion. And it's a very similar idea in the Hindu model of the universe, and that it's always breathing, so it's expanding and
Right.
contracting. And these are ancient images that I guess that we could say have become archetypal. And science has its version of it, but it's another story. It's another creation story that we don't know if any of them are literally true or all of them have some seed of truth to them, but that there's something universal, apparently.
Well, the thing about science is that one observation will kill 1,000 theories.
Right.
And this is what Ron observed. So if this is what he saw, this is what he saw. And of course, you say, well, how in the world could I repeat that? Well, you can repeat it by learning how to meditate deeply and develop these skills, and then you'll see what's there. So we want to close just with there's many paths out there, but they all take you on one path to the way to spirituality. Madame Blavatsky said there was a spirituality in times past. There was an integral part of daily life that balanced spirituality against materialism. And this was based on love for yourself, which led to love for your neighbor as yourself. And that has been lost, but it's coming back now, is what it appears. That's opinion. But this way was a part of the collective unconscious throughout the entire universe. And there's a piece of that in each entity, and each entity is linked to one another. And so this path, this way to spirituality, is a sharing of love, compassion, joy, honesty, and integrity, male and female, and the constant evolution of all these things. There's just ongoing change, and so be it. So with that, that's what we did in year 5. We'll get out of this. And there you have it. And next week we'll start year 6. And just as a point of information, our YouTube channel that contains the recordings is up to 1,140 plus subscribers of 350 plus videos that we've posted from all this stuff. So someone is out there looking at all this stuff. For example, the class last week had 700 views within a couple days, So there is some level of interest in what we're covering here. So we'll see what happens.
Somewhere.
But
Feel free to show up, folks.
Yeah.
We'd be
Well,
happy to...
yeah, people, are happy to look at it whenever it's convenient for them. That's what they want to do. That's the power of the internet. So you get it what's most convenient to you, wherever you want.
Time and space are illusions anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for being with us, Bruce.
All right.
Ron did an incredible job.
Yeah, he sure did.
So we'll see you next week. Have a good.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.